Who are the most overrated quarterbacks in the initial consensus fantasy football quarterback rankings for 2022? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another week on Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. It's time to continue another series here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We're looking at now the overrated quarterbacks. These are the potential busts based on their current expert consensus rankings. I know it's still early in the process, and some of these players might be adjusted accordingly to more fit their values here for 2022. But we want to take a look at 9 players on this side of the ledger. We started looking at 9 potential quarterback sleepers based on their ranking and surrounding current ADP. We're going to do that here with the quarterbacks you might want to avoid or think are overrated if they're current spots right now. Then we'll do the same thing. We'll do the running back sleepers and busts. We'll go to wide receivers, and we'll do that with tight ends. So start another series here on Locked On Fantasy Football, bridging you toward your fantasy football drafts here and getting you your fantasy football fix in the offseason with in-depth analysis here every weekday. So good stuff coming on today's show as I break it down for you. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. I'm also proud to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's start with a group of quarterbacks. I've actually put them in a second tier here. All the second tier quarterbacks, according to Fantasy Pros, I do have a question with. So your top tier right now is Josh Allen, in some order, Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, and then Lamar Jackson. So all those guys make sense as high investments based on what they've done recently in fantasy football. They're going to come through. They're pretty consistent. They're in the same type of offense, same type of weapons. After that, it gets a little dicey, and I think the spot that you usually don't want to reach in is that middle tier. And in that middle tier, you have your quarterbacks 5 through 7. So we'll talk about them right now. The first one up is Kyler Murray. He's number 5 there in the rankings. Now, Kyler, look, I do like that he can run a little bit, but he's also not as dedicated as a runner. And sometimes he can get fickle about that and not wanting to take off and run. I can't say I love the weapons. DeAndre Hopkins coming back a year older, hobbled a bit. AJ Green still in the mix here. I don't know how much Marquise Brown is going to give them. He's a hit or miss, like really boom or bust type receiver. So I know he can stretch the field, but is that what the Cardinals really want to do when you look at some of their concepts and bringing the 2 tight ends with Zach Ertz and Max Williams? They invested a little bit more in tight end as well with Trey McBride. So do they go more 12 personnel? I would say more horizontal, short to intermediate passing still in the works here. Don't forget about no Chase Edmonds. They're trying to replace that production. James Conner, not quite the receiver. They're going to be limited in that capacity as well. They lose a key receiver in Christian Kirk. So they kind of replace Christian Kirk with Marquise Brown. That's how I kind of look at it. And really, you look, AJ Green was pretty pedestrian last year. He's going to have to be out there again. He was okay in an expanded role, but how does he do that another year removed from 30 years old? And Hopkins is getting up there. And he finally broke down a little bit, had an injury that cost him significant time last year. It was as durable as they came, but that's a sign of aging as well. So those are a little bit of concerning receivers out there in Hopkins and Green. Again, Brown, I just don't trust as a consistent playmaker. That's why the Ravens kind of moved him. When people say, oh, the Cardinals are more vertical passing game, the Ravens are more tight end based and running based and looking to do things short term. Well, the Cardinals are like that too. If you look at some of the things they do, they're not the best deep ball throwing team. Part of it is their pass protection can be up or down here to protect Murray. Murray needs to buy time to throw on the run. He doesn't necessarily want to take off and run and do those kind of things as much as Lamar Jackson is willing and able to do that, or even a guy we'll talk about in a couple of minutes here that is in that profile, in that tier. But yeah, Kyler Murray, I'm just not feeling it. Again, if he's not running and getting the numbers that way with the big touchdown numbers and getting it downfield, I think he'll be okay touchdown wise, but I don't see it necessarily being well past 30 here. I think it could be more of the 20s. We also saw James Conner in this running game pilfer quite a bit straight up, even with Murray's opportunities with his legs near the red zone. So I just don't feel it here, Kyler Murray. This is a pretty expensive price. I'm not going to do that here, whether it's ADP or ranking at 5 among quarterbacks here in 2022. Next guy I look at is Joe Burrow, and he finished pretty solid last year. He was number 8 there, and now he's bumped up to number 6. I don't see why you would bump up Joe Burrow too much, though. He's not going to give you anything running-wise. He'll occasionally take off and run, can get some touchdowns there, pad the yardage totals. But this is pretty much the same offense here. You got Jamar Chase and got the same complementary receivers. T. Higgins coming off a little bit of off-season surgery there. You also have Tyler Boyd. You lose a key target that was responsible for some of his underrated production last year. And C.J. Uzomah at tight end. Where do they get that? I'm not sure. Hayden Hurst is going to give them that punch, or really Drew Sample. So when you look at that, where do they replace that? Or team's going to be more focused on Jamar Chase and let Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins beat them? Do Higgins and Chase produce that well with the big plays after the catch and the touchdown? So there's going to be natural regression. Don't forget about Joe Mixon out of the backfield. He's coming off a big year, playing off this past game. The Bengals should be playing ahead a little bit more. I think their defense is pretty decent. They're downhill, good running team. They've upgraded their offensive line. It does help with the protection of Joe Burrow, but really helps with the run blocking in front with Joe Mixon. So the Bengals are a good team, and they're not going to desperately chuck it. And again, Burrow's hurt by the fact he's not going to run as much. So I don't see it being too much of a stretch to bump him up 2 spots from his finish from last year to 8 to 6. But you look at, I just don't want to pay that price for Joe Burrow. He was nice as a bargain value there outside of the top 10, top 12 when we look at QB. But when we start paying a premium here, which we are, as a 6th quarterback off the board, I would avoid it. Now, Jalen Hurts, there is some upside with him with A.J. Brown in the mix playing off Devonta Smith. He also has Dallas Goedert there. So 3 decent weapons in the front line. But the Eagles are still a running team at heart. There was a lot of rushing production from Jalen Hurts. So how does he counteract that? Now, if he turns some of that rushing into staying in the pocket, buying time and throwing downfield, is he accurate enough to get to A.J. Brown? And we know the transition from rushing yards to passing yards for a quarterback, big difference. They're not the same value per yard there that you're going to get in that transition. And if he's going to throw a little bit more, you're not going to get that opportunity for the shorter touchdowns either that you could go to the traditional running backs, including Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell. So again, I think there's going to be some touchdown regression with his rushing, some yardage regression based on passing more here. So I like Jalen Hurts again, but I don't want to pay this high premium here at the number 7 QB. So Burrow and Hurts, that say that 3 times fast. The guys in that middle tier, second tier there of QB1s not going there right now. Their values, we'll see if they fluctuate and go down a little bit, but there's some guys we talked about in our last show that I liked ahead of them, and the guys on the rise. I mean, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, some of these guys are lingering there in the rankings behind them that can get bumped up here. So keep that in mind. That's why these guys are a bit overrated when I think there's just good value there. Yeah, I mentioned those guys and Dak Prescott too. I think I'd take most of those guys ahead of these 3 guys at a better value right now where they stand in the rankings. All right, that's 3 of our quarterbacks that we consider overrated / busts here in the early consensus fantasy football rankings on Fantasy Pros is what we're using here on the show. And we told you from the top that this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. It's an exciting time of year at BetOnline. I know we have the NFL season over, the NFL draft is over, the Kentucky Derby is just in the books, but there's a lot more to get in on here, including big endings to the NBA and NHL season. Then you have MLB now fully immersed into its 2nd month. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number 1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights. We had a big one with the big upset with Dimitri Bivol over Canelo Alvarez. So check out bigger fights are yet to come. And even next season's NFL futures, yep, they're on the board here at BetOnline. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use a mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we will continue here with our Monday show on Locked On Fantasy Football, looking at the overrated quarterback, bust alerts early in the fantasy football consensus expert rankings. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're free and available to you on all platforms. All right, the next guy I've been wanting to talk about for a while, he's in the QB1 conversation again. He was a bit disappointing last year, we know, with some of the things. He was probably checked out of Seattle. Russell Wilson. Now, look, he's not going to be Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater. He's going to boost the value of the quarterback here and play off these receivers much better in Denver. But are we prepared to boost him into the back end QB1 status with so many quarterback options? I mentioned quite a few there. Why I didn't want to go for Burrow and Hurts. Do we want to go with Wilson here that much, even if he falls into the 9-10 category at QB1? I still think it's a high price to pay for him. The weapons are pretty good. We can't argue with that. You have Tim Patrick, you got Cortland Sutton, you got Jerry Jeudy. But Tim Patrick's the only guy that's been showing up and producing here. You have a lot of injury history for Cortland Sutton. You have Jerry Jeudy being rather inconsistent as a route runner in hands, a bit surprising when those were his calling cards coming out of Alabama. So there's a lot to learn here. And then at tight end, will Albert O step up? Wilson has not been a big factor there in producing points when throwing to the tight end. They try to get a replacement there and get some help with Greg Dulcich, but will that rookie be up to speed? He's a guy that is a pretty big liability. He's a blocker, very good athlete, but how do they get him on the field, especially in that 11 personnel? How much are they going to check down to the backs as much? And there was some production there that you got from Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. So a lot of question marks. And Fant was a big part of this offense. Moving him as part of the Wilson trade can't be ignored here. So, and I'm not sure Russell Wilson is going to give you what he once was able to give you on the ground producing numbers. We just haven't seen that in recent years. And it's not like he's going with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett where there's established chemistry. These things are going to have to develop quite a bit. This could be a gritty division. I think the only thing that helps here is that there's some potential shootouts with Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes and Derek Carr. The Broncos have a pretty good defense. I still think at heart they want to grind and run it pretty well. That's why they brought back Melvin Gordon at late stage of free agency to keep with Javonte Williams. Garrett Bowles and that offensive line still built to run the ball a little bit, play defense complementary, and get some big plays in the passing game. So Russell Wilson could be early career Russell Wilson, where we see some numbers there that are nice, but not fantasy football consistent and relevant to us as much as some other guys on the board that could be available earlier and later. All right, the next guy I look at is Matthew Stafford. Now, he did tie for the league lead in interceptions with Trevor Lawrence last year. That was a bit underrated. If you get those minus points in your leagues, they can add up. He was saved by his volume and the touchdown pass total, getting above 30 last year. Will that happen again? Cooper Kupp had a career year, so you think Cooper Kupp's numbers will curb for sure. Then you lose Robert Woods. I don't think that's insignificant here. They had good rapport. I know he got it done without Woods for a lot last season, but he also had Odell Beckham Jr. stepping up in an ideal complementary role in their offense. They do have Allen Robinson in the mix, so think about it. What do they get here without Beckham, without Woods, and then you have Allen Robinson in there? Is Van Jefferson going to step up as a third receiver here and help put some numbers up? Are they going to get more out of tight end? So these are some big question marks. So a lot of, again, the numbers that Stafford produced, a good chunk of them came from Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp cools down, Stafford's numbers are going to go down as well. This is definitely a passing team overall. They want to do that, but they're also wary, want to play defense, run the ball. They think they can do that better with Cam Akers healthy and Darrell Henderson now providing some depth. They also got Kyron Williams in the draft. So they got some depth in the backfield. I think that's what they want to do. Pound it. You lose Andrew Whitworth, the left tackle. I know they like Joe Noteboom, but a bit of a transition there. You have a change up elsewhere on your offensive line of guard. So a lot of things are maneuvering through, and the Rams, I think, are better defensively with some of the moves. They lost some pieces here in the offseason, but with including Von Miller and Darius Williams, but there's some guys in there in the mix that should keep this defense pretty strong here overall. And again, defense and running game, still a good calling card for the Rams. In the end, with Aaron Donald and company, that's what got them the Super Bowl, not their offense overall. So Cooper Kupp is brilliant, but again, Cooper Kupp getting a little older, and if he diminishes a little bit on his returns here as the wide receiver one, that's going to eat into Stafford and trickle down to the rest of this passing game for the numbers. And again, running game defense could also be a pivot here. They should get more scoring on the ground and more yardage on the ground here to take pressure off Stafford. I think part of it, keep in mind, Akers was down for the season early, and then you had Henderson, who's injury-prone self here. Sonny Michel was their best back down the stretch. That was going to prompt you to pass the game all the time. When you have the dynamic Akers in there, you could flip it back to Sean McVay's early days with Todd Gurley and be a little bit more run-heavy. So numbers, I think, are going to take a hit with the yardage and the touchdown totals. So I want to slide Stafford pretty well from where he was last season. People are excited for Derek Carr because he has now Devontae Adams. So you had Devontae Adams, potential for another 1,000-yard receiver with the double-digit touchdowns, and then playing off that with Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. But three weapons. You want those three weapons for the quarterback, but we know that Carr has been pretty uneven. He's also inconsistent, even when he has the weapons. So there's a lot left to be decided. And I think there's a little bit of cancellation. Some of the Adams-Waller crossover is going to be seen because they're both big possession type receivers that can stretch some parts of the field and also score touchdowns. So I don't know if they'll double up on those touchdowns. I don't think it's only the Raiders are a scoring machine here. I think you'll see a good passing volume, but again, this Raiders team not overall very good. They still have a lot of holes defensively here. And Carr, again, is volume enough to get it done here? I mean, we've teetered and borderline Carr having that value as a QB1. It hasn't quite materialized consistently because, again, he gives you nothing in the running aspect whatsoever, yardage or scoring, and he doesn't really push the ball the way you want downfield to maximize the yardage in a particular game. So he's had his fine moments in fantasy football, but he's not a guy that we feel consistent or comfortable about in our lineup. So he's in the 15 range. I think he's lower than that right now. I mean, there's a lot of good quarterback options, so you think 15 is a pretty good value for Derek Carr, but he's a guy that, again, I'd rather have someone that drops to that value. I would even rather have Stafford to that spot if they're dropping from where his status is out of QB1 contention. So keep that in mind. All these other guys we talked about, Watson and Rodgers and Brady and Prescott, they're going to push some of these guys down. The question is, do you feel like this player is a good enough value to have good relation to the QB1 production? I don't think Derek Carr falls into that category here in 2022. Again, I wish it was so. If he was a better quarterback, and I feel like, okay, he's got Adams, he's going to pile on those numbers he gets with Waller and Renfrow, we would go that direction. But I think he's going to eat into some of those numbers with those two guys, and that's going to hurt his overall production here in 2022. Now we have another break to take here before we look at three young quarterbacks, or two young quarterbacks and one slightly older quarterback in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. I do have to tell you, however, it is almost summer, and with summer coming, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bar is the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. Throw them in your bags, in your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you're fueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bar, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. All Built Bars and their special puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it with a very delicious treat. If you haven't tried the puffs, you have to. They're delicious. They're marshmallow goodness wrapped up in a protein bar. You can have banana cream pie, cinnamon churro. Who doesn't want a protein bar that tastes like a churro? And they're only 140 calories. Sign us up. Most Built Bars do contain only 130 calories, 4 grams sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar that usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Go to Built.com to get all your favorites: banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, coconut almond, mint, so many more that you can choose from there. They're all delicious flavors. New flavors are coming out all the time. Just check them out at Built.com. Get in on Built Bars and Puffs. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, let us close the show looking at, again, two young quarterbacks and one slightly older quarterback that is being pushed by a new quarterback here in 2022. We have Justin Fields up next. I want to be more enthusiastic about Justin Fields. Really, I do. But the Bears are just not doing any favors. They transitioned from Matt Nagy to Matt Eberflus, and you're excited, but there could be something here. Then they go to the Packers offense. But Darnell Mooney's still looking like their best receiver. Try to sell us a Byron Pringle a little bit more here. They really didn't address wide receiver well enough in the draft. They didn't really have a lot to work with. They didn't address offensive line much in the draft. They have a good project there of Braxton Jones out of Southern Utah State. he could end up starting on one side, but Taven Jenkins and Larry Borum leave a lot to be desired at the bookend tackles here. So I don't see the Bears changing their stripes too much. Do we David Montgomery and Darnell Mooney leaning? Do we finally get something more out of Cole Kmet at tight end? It's hard to say. I just don't feel much buzz or excitement over this Bears particular offense in the transition. It's a pretty talent poor roster around Justin Fields, and it's really disappointing. So not a lot of depth there when you look at Mooney. Yeah, is a fine receiver, but what do they do at tight end? Is Pringle going to be more than just a guy that he was in Kansas City for Patrick Mahomes? Or are they going to get some depth there? Are they going to get some slot production? What are they going to get in the checkdown game with David Montgomery? Are they going to lean heavily on the run? Here, it's basically Justin Fields is rebooting in a second rookie season with a new coaching staff. So I want to be there with Justin Fields. I just don't feel the same way I do about him versus Trey Lance. Lance, I trust the offense a little bit more. It's exciting that they'll use his legs well. He has a lot better support system. He's got those three weapons, the better offensive line. Fields, I just know he can only get better and start regularly this time, but is that enough to trust him? And I don't know if they're going to let him loose running as much as we think either, even with the new coaching staff. So I'm going to be buyer beware on Justin Fields. Here, I'm more excited about Trey Lance. You have another option here that you look at in that young quarterback category, and the same type of pedigree. You have Trevor Lawrence there of Clemson going into his second year, but essentially he's got a rookie year for you too here because he's starting over with a new offense. It's no Urban Meyer, Darrell Bevell mess. Now you have Doug Peterson in there trying to install some of his concepts that worked with Carson Wentz here back in Philadelphia. So what are you going to do with Trevor Lawrence? Do we really feel comfortable about Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones? What are they going to do with Laquan Treadwell? They don't seem to want to use Laviska Shenault the right way. Looks like they want to use maybe Travis Etienne in more a traditional running back sense with James Robinson coming off the major injury. So a lot of things to watch out for with this Jaguars offensive situation. But again, I'm more excited. In the same vein, looking at Justin Fields versus Trey Lance, I lean Lance. Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, we talked about Wilson in much better shape in his offensive line, second year in the offense, better overall weapons. He's the guy I'm going to trust more. I mean, the talent is certainly a doubt here. Who's more talented, Lawrence or Wilson? They were number one and number two. So the talent right now from the NFL level is pretty even. We can go in and think that Lawrence was a modified guy from Clemson all along, but right now they're pretty even in their production right now. Wilson might be ahead if he had been healthier there last year. Lawrence, that was the only thing he had over Wilson, that he was out there for every game. But does that mean a lot if he's got to start from scratch and it's basically another rookie year for him, just like the Fields there? So Fields and Lawrence, not on my radar as even sleeper QBs that I'm looking at here in fantasy football. Okay, the final quarterback I'll talk about, this one is pretty obvious. And he's still rather young. I still think he could start for a good 5 to 6 more years in this league if things break, but I don't think it's going to break in his favor. It's Ryan Tannehill, and he's been downhill. He started at QB7. That was a pretty strong finish a couple of years ago, then went to QB13. It's not going to continue to get better here with one quarterback sitting back there and Malik Willis waiting in the wings. You also don't have your go-to receiver anymore, A.J. Brown. And that was the big reason why Tannehill fell off so greatly from his QB1 status, is not having that reliable receiver. Is Robert Woods going to do the trick here? What are we going to get from Treylon Burks? And keep in mind, last year, it looked pretty good with A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. We didn't get much health or production from either one of those guys. The tight end kind of faded there. They had Jonas Smith at one time, but they had to rely on Anthony Ferkser. He was not getting the job done. So now you're looking at Austin Hooper. How long will it take Treylon Burks to get up to speed? Robert Woods could be like Julio Jones, coming off a major injury, getting up there in age. How does he respond here in this new offense? So I don't know what you're getting from the Titans. I was thinking pretty good here for Tannehill, the situation where they had Brown and Woods was on track here, but now you have Woods maybe being the number one. You have a lot of inexperience behind him. Not sure what you're going to get from the tight ends. And we know getting a lot more out of your backs in the passing game is a lot tougher with Derrick Henry in there. I know Derrick Henry has his moments catching passes, but the weaponry is just not there. The volume is just not there. He's going to be a lot touchdown dependent. He needs to pad those stats with a little bit of running, both yardage and scoring there. I don't think we're going to get it. Again, Malik Willis, again, Tannehill has a hangover from the playoffs, and he doesn't seem to be in the right state here. He got shell-shocked, I think, by that Bengals performance, and kind of the doubts and things that creeped in. They were looking at other quarterbacks. Keep in mind, they were early in on the Aaron Rodgers derby. He moved to Nashville, according to reports, so that messed with his head. The Deshaun Watson was there, so I'm not sure what's going on with Ryan Tannehill, but I think this could be another rough transitional year. Another one for the Titans, much like we saw with Marcus Mariota giving up to Tannehill. This could be Tannehill giving it up to Malik Willis at some point in the season. So I don't think it's that drastic of a potential scenario here in 2022. All right, there you have it. There's a look at your 9 potentially overrated quarterbacks, potential busts here for 2022, according to the early expert consensus fantasy football rankings on Fantasy Pros. We'll tackle the running backs there. This time we'll go on the positive side, the sleeper running backs. So we're going to look at the sleepers and underrated guys at those positions. We'll look at 9 of those players. We'll look at 9 of the busts of running backs. And 9 is a good number. It's my favorite number, and it's a good number with which to attack these positions and consider when we look at the whole field there over basically 24 to 36 players there when we're looking at the best values here at most positions across to wide receivers where we start 3, but with quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, you can definitely look at 9 there as a sweet spot for sleepers and busts. And that's a good way to identify them also on your fantasy football cheat sheets when we get there, a little bit advanced scouting for that respect. A little bit more advanced scouting for you. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Now make Locked On NFL your second listen. The schedule may be dark, but it will be released for 2022 next week. The NFL never stops with other news needed as Locked On NFL. And insights and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus local Locked On NFL hosts repping all 32 squads. There's no offseason for real fans, so make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow as we start looking at the running back sleepers here for 2022.